Shut up, compressor.
Off with 4 at 1/8, over. Roger, thank you.
Hey everyone, Matt here with Duke's Models, and welcome to the first episode of the Tamiya F-4B Phantom build. Now, if you watched my quick test fit review, you know that I taped the whole thing together. So to start off with, I've gone ahead and removed all the tape, and now we're back to just parts. And to start off with, it's time to go ahead and prime a few things, mainly the cockpit area, all the cockpit stuff, the engines, and other things that need to basically get closed into the fuselage before we go. So, to do that, I'm going to go ahead and use my color-covered, spattered little cover sheet here instead of the clean white one because primer is messy. Now, to prime this, I'm using some Moto MK12 thinned down with Mr. Leveling Thinner. I absolutely love this stuff. Very similar to Mr. Surfacer 1500. Now it is on to the main event, the cockpit tub and the nose gear bay. Let's start on the bottom. So my plan after getting everything primed was to go ahead and start painting and masking and detailing. And then Quinta Studios went and posted their test print for their upcoming F-4B set, which will replace, at the very least, the instrument panel, these little corner consoles, side consoles, with some truly amazing detail. And so, fuck. So at this point I have to ask myself if I want to continue with out of the box, or if I want to wait for the Quinta stuff to come out and use that. And that might slow the build down because you kind of need the cockpit to close the fuselage and all that good stuff. But fortunately, the way Tamiya has engineered this kit, there is a lot of other stuff that we can do in the meantime. So I am going to pack up the various cockpit bits and essentially work on other shit for a while. We've got gearbays we can do, we've got engines we can do, we've got intakes, we've got exhausts, we've got pylons and weapons, and I can even probably work on the wings and maybe even get some of the markings down. I can complete the tail. So there's a lot that can be done in the meantime while waiting for this to come in. So it's going to mean the build's going to be a bit out of natural order, but hey, I can sacrifice that for some detail. So let's move on to painting some engines. Now, the exhaust trunk coming through here, to me it tells you to paint it XF71, which is interior gray-green, so this color, which, I don't know, when I look at the reference photos, this seems way too pale and way too desaturated. So I'm going to mix it with something a little bit brighter. Okay, so first I'm going to come in with some straight aircraft gray-green. And here's the gray-green on the high ridges of the exhaust tunnels. Now, I had a little bit of gray-green left in the cup, and so I decided I'm going to do a little bit of lightening operations with some Grigio Azzurro MRP 302. This is kind of a light green-blue type color. I guess Grigio Azzurro means gray-blue, but it definitely has a warm green tone to it. So I've added it to the cup as well, along with a nice little dose of Mr. Rapid Thinner. And with that combo, I've also dialed down the MAC valve, so we've got a good stippling action type thing going on. And I'm just going to spray that in here just to give some lightening, kind of blend down that stark raised and valley thing, and just make it overall a bit more interesting. And none of this will matter because once these are closed up, it gets pretty dark. But I wanted to add a little bit more lightness before we get to those phases in the good old stage makeup fashion, to hope that some of this actually does kind of show through. Okay, so next up, I've mixed some MRP 32 green for wheels into my aircraft gray green, and the result is this more saturated green color. Probably still a bit too light compared to what I see in Phantoms and reference photos, but we've also got to take into account that we're going to be entering a world of darkness once the exhausts are closed, and so a little bit lighter isn't necessarily a bad thing. This stuff has been thinned down with Mr. Rapid Thinner, so coverage is a little bit degraded on purpose to try to maintain at least some hint of what we put down before. And there we have it. But of course, once you block this off, it's going to get a lot darker in a hurry. Still looking pretty good. So I need to clean out the airbrush, and then we can come pick back up with some metallics. Okay, so rather than masking and airbrushing the flame holders, which are barely going to be visible inside the trunks anyway, I decided I would go ahead and brush paint with some Vallejo metal color. And my aluminum is just completely shot. You shake it and it feels like there's a rock in there, so in the trash. Instead, I've got some pale burnt metal, and to silver it up a bit, some ammo steel. Now, this isn't the best brush painting combo in the world. The Vallejo stuff is notoriously thin, but with a few coats, we can definitely get there. And this will all be weathered, and it'll all be buried in darkness, so if it looks a bit crappy, I will somehow manage to survive. Okay, so now that these are painted up and setting and all that good stuff, it's time to go ahead and get the turbines painted. And for this, I am using MRP steel. I was going to do something a bit darker, but when you put this on top of this, it all vanishes. So I want something a bit brighter to hopefully kind of stand out a little bit, hold its own, and then we can do a little bit of weathering on top of it. And that might even be too dark. It's just not grabbing a lot of light. It's still completely invisible. Well, mostly invisible. Okay, so I want to go brighter than that. Should be a little bit brighter. This is Moto T024. It's iron, but in my experience, it sprays a little bit brighter than that. Okay, that's definitely looking brighter. Now, plop that on there. It shows through a little bit. Okay, next up, we're going to play with some acrylic filters, specifically Ammo Military Green. Now what this does, fuck it, let's do the main trunks first so you can actually see what's happening here. What this does is this really kicks up the saturation of the green. It gives us a tone closer to what I was kind of going for. I mean, look at that. This stuff is fantastic. I honestly want to push further ahead in some of my armor subjects just so I can bust this stuff out and play with it more, because every time I've used it, I've come away extremely impressed. I think even more so than like oil or enamel filters, the stuff just brings out tonality. It reminds me of some of the Vallejo washes that I've tried in the past that never quite work right. But man, they would put down an interesting patina on something like, you know, a British dark green or an olive drab. They would just throw a little curveball into it. And this stuff does the same. Now you have to watch it so it doesn't settle too much into the bottom here. And you have to come back and kind of clean it out as you go. But it definitely gives a lovely saturated green tone that just works. And of course, as it dries, the effect does get more muted, so I'm going to take that into account and try to see it about 50% less than what it actually is going down. That way you can kind of plan around it a little bit. Yeah, there's, side by side, that's quite a pump up in intensity of that green shade. So hopefully that'll withstand future weathering to come. Next up on our fun little journey here, I am using some Mr. Weathering Color Multi-Black to start establishing a bit of definition in the Flameholders. Basically using it as a bit of a ghetto panel line wash. This stuff, unlike their other tones, actually seems to flow really well. And it's not so much trying to be dust or grime so much as it is just black. Now, one cool thing that this does is gives us some definition to the turbine blades. Just look how quick and easy this is. All we do, get the brush down here, literally just kind of touch it anywhere in here and it just sucks right around all that detail, all the crevices, and gives us the definition that we're looking for. Hopefully that'll help them stand out a little bit more behind everything else. Yeah, those are a little bit more prominent now. And then, oh yeah, that definitely helps. Cool. Okay, so after doing this, and I'm kind of not feeling it, I'm going back to probably what I should have done originally, and airbrushing. I'm going to start with some MRP Dark Gunship Gray, which isn't really FS 36081, not even close, but it's a great, dirty, warm gray, and it'll help soften this up a bit. And this has been thinned down with some Mr. Rapid Thinner. So that's definitely toned down. That's looking pretty cool. I want to lighten this up more, and I want to add some browner tones to it as well. But this is a good base to start with. Okay, next up, just to lighten things up a bit, I've added some clear doped linen into the Dark Gunship Gray. Now we've got a lighter tone. bit haphazard is fine there. Kind of liking that. Okay, so I accidentally recorded this bit with a dead mic, so y'all are just gonna have to deal with me doing some after-the-fact VO as we weather up the turbine spinners. For this, I'm going to be using some ink, including the Daler-Rowney Sepia. This is fully undiluted, just raw ink, stabbing it onto the spinner, and then stab, 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 stab with a sponge. Now the great thing about ink is that it dries very quickly, so it's possible to come in and start building layers like nobody's business. This would take days if you were doing it with oils, but with this stuff we can get in, stab, 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 and get on with the next layer and build stuff up quite effectively, very fast. So after the sepia, and a few more stabs, there we go, stab, stab, just to be sure. It's time to move on to the white, providing a bit of opacity so it doesn't look so copperish, and basically making it look like a mime. Stab, 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 you get the idea, more stabby. Now I'm not sure that I caught it on video or not, but basically after this I go through with a few more colors, building up the layers, building up the opacity, building up the variation, and basically getting things to a happy place. So this is a bit of black going down, whoop, a bit of black going down on top of the white, and then I believe there was a bit more sepia that came into play after that as well, after a little bit more white. Again, just building these layers, building the interest and the definition to make these things really stand out and pop against the flame holders, and you know, hopefully make the exhaust somewhat visible. And once I got those knocked out, I went ahead and brought in some ink to deal with the actual flame holder rings themselves. If you look on reference photos, sometimes the rings have different tones, and so I wanted to try to capture that. So basically, this is just getting in here and very gently painting the middle ring with, I believe this is a mix of black and sepia. Because it's so thin, I don't want to just completely blow it out. I'm going very small, very slow. But these inks do, again, dry very fast, so it's possible to get in there and build additional variation as you want to. So that's pretty much how they came out. Okay, the time has come to throw on a flat coat. And for this I'm using MRP's Matte Lacquer Clear. It does a good job with this kind of thing. We're still not done with the flame holders, but they are getting there. And we're certainly to the point where I can ungloss them. The fun bits. So these look kind of fucked up when they're all shiny, right? I'll come in here and make them not shiny anymore. Something happens. They start looking more the part. Still not sure why I'm doing all this, because none of this will be visible. Okay, next up, one more thing before we return to inks. That is to have a little bit of fun with some AK pencils. So we can use these pencils for a couple different things. One of them is to do a little bit of lightening on the turbine spinner itself. By just basically stabbing the pencil into it, getting a brush damp. Just kind of banging it around like that. On the flame holders, I basically want to go ahead and dirty these up quite a bit in various ways. So first of all, we've got a sepia pencil here. It's funny, you know, as pencils, these things kind of suck, but as depositors of small amounts of pigment that we can use to do interesting things with, they're pretty brilliant. There's the sepia. Let's go ahead and blend that stuff. I'm gonna bring in some green blue. A bit of a kind of a heat staining thing going on in certain parts of these rings. Don't want to really overdo it, but we're also going to get just a few hints with the sand pencil. Okay, that's looking pretty interesting. Some stuff going on. And then we'll pop that over that. Look at that. We've got some interesting visual stuff happening. So let me knock out the next one, and then we will proceed to the next step. Okay, now it's time to start adding some ink fun to the exhaust tunnels and to the borders right around the edge of the flame holders. So for this, I've got a mix of inks. It's some neutral gray, it's some carbon black, and some transparent burnt umber, giving me kind of this dirty brown gray color. Now what's happening here is I was getting bored trying to build up layers with the airbrush. So I decided I'm going to go ahead and just brush the first layers of this stuff on and let the airbrush do some pickup work. Alright, let's bring the airbrush back into play. And it's kind of sort of visible a little bit. Not much. Okay, so while I'm letting the tunnels dry, I think I'm in a place where I can go ahead and start cementing the flame holders to the turbines. Because everything here is dry. We've got some grunged up sides that should match with the back of this. So let's go ahead and do that. Okay, so with all that various work, the cold, hard truth remains that you really don't see much up in this engine. And it just kind of is there. And this is good overhead lighting shining right into it. You know, it's going to be much more occluded when it's actually inside the F4. So I think I'm going to call it with this and just pretty much move on. I do want to look at one more thing first, though. And that is how this comes across with the burner cams in place. Yeah, once you put these on there, so much of that gets hidden away, never to be seen again. But I think we've got a good thing going with the flame holders. We've got a good sense of kind of griminess up there in the engines themselves. So with that, it's time to glue this puppy shut. Make sure this little doohickey down here is facing down. Thankfully they've got these arrows to help make sure everything stays nice and aligned. Good guy Tamiya at it again. All right. There are our engines. Okay, next up on our tour of things I can definitely do something about while I'm waiting for that Quinta set to be produced, we have the Gearbays. Now, I should probably go ahead and prime up all the Gearbays and all the stuff that gets to be painted white, but I'm impatient and I want to at least get something going. So here we are with the nose Gearbay, and here we are with some MRP Insignia white. Now I know this should be navy white or something, but Insignia white's pretty damn close. And hey, white's white at the end of the day. Okay. So now let me get some other stuff together, prime it up, and we'll paint some more things white. Okay, so I've sprayed a whole bunch of white, and now I need to paint one little tiny box in the gear bay here red. It's actually this box right here. Now, painting red over white is always a dicey proposition. You risk things turning pink and all that. And so I'm going to try doing a little bit of brush work with something that I do with airbrushing all the time, which is putting a yellow base down. So this is just some Vallejo RAL 1003 or RLM 04, just flat yellow, thinned with a bit of AK's 3rd generation thinner. We'll let that dry for a few minutes and we'll come and paint it red. Okay, now we're back with some Vallejo flat red. Alright. That'll do. Not perfect, but eh. Okay, next up, I need to spray a few things metallic, like the J79s. And for this I'm going to be using MRP titanium. Why? Why the fuck not? Might be a little bit too bright, but like so many things we've been working on so far, these just will not be visible. Beyond maybe a tiny little glimpse, and that's it. I'm also going to do the same color as a base for the surrounds for the auxiliary air doors. Okay, next up, I'm going to put a little bit of hairspray down over the titanium on the auxiliary door outlets. Okay, next it's time to go ahead and shoot some green for this crossmember and for the borders of the auxiliary air doors. And for this, I'm going to be using SEA Camo Green, or more importantly, FS34102, which is roughly equivalent of interior green. Now, I should note that there's also this interior green from MRP, and they're very close, and it's got that 34151, but I mean, again, they're quite close. I think the SEA green is a little bit more saturated, and that's literally the reason I'm choosing it, because, hey, saturation's cool. It'll give a little spark of color. Now comes the fun part, painting these and then doing a little bit of chipping. Ooh, chipping. That sounds so loud when it cuts through like that. Alright, I'm not sure if I put enough hairspray down on this to chip it effectively, but we'll find out. That's pretty. That is exactly the kind of shit I'm looking for. Now I think these portions are covered up, but just in case. Okay, so that looks the part to me. And then when we add in the whole Gearbay spar thing, that looks pretty cool. There's like an insert piece that drops in here, and then the doors are going to be covering up, again, almost all of this detail. I should probably see how much they will cover up before I make a call on the detail painting levels here. Okay, so the auxiliary air doors are basically a three-part assembly. These two halves that glue together, not really even worth cleaning up because the glue joins are going to be completely hidden. But that basically drops in just like so. And then on top of that, with the outer doors, that just do that. And that is how much of the J79s you will see. And that's if you're holding it upside down and looking in there, which probably isn't very likely. I mean, you're more likely to see the inside components of the actual B3 and B4 parts as opposed to what's going on the engines. But you can still see some of that hose work and stuff like that, so I don't know, I think it might be worth a little bit of fun in there. Just to give some visual interest in the off chance somebody ever actually looks in that direction. Okay, now it is time for some magic wash. This is All-Clad Aqua Gloss, Tamiya Rubber Black, and some good old-fashioned H2O. This will help bring out some definition in the gearbays. And make me wish I hadn't glued them in the test build phase. Now we're going to move on to the main gearbays and the engine, and as you can see I went ahead and painted up a few details in the engine, basically some Vallejo black-green, some scale color citrine alchemy I think for the little doodads, some Tamiya clear blue for some anodized fittings, nothing too fancy. See if we can make some of this stuff pop a little bit more with the same wash. I think it might be a bit of an ask. Now, if it looks too stark right now, Gearbays needs stage makeup. Okay. Now to let that stuff dry for a little bit. Okay, so the gearbays have been given their wash, same with the portions of the J79s visible through the auxiliary air doors. Now it is time to glue this big old spar into place. So, good old extra thin to the rescue here. Start on the center portion. The fit on this thing is extremely good, and honestly, probably so good that it doesn't need to be glued, but I'm a klutz, and if I drop things, I would love for them to not pose a big problem, so we're going to glue them anyway. Then out here on the wings, there's actually a little tiny bit of flex just because, you know, the wings are plastic and whatnot. And so right in there we want to make sure that we glue them so that there is no flex anymore. Okay. Now the fun stuff. Time to put the wings on. Again, the fit of these things, fit of everything on this kit is just superlative. And there's really like no issue whatsoever with any of this. Okay, there is the side glued up. Only thing I'm not happy about is that little extra thing of glue there. Sand that down when time comes. but so far so good. So I'm going to go ahead and glue up the other side, and then we'll keep on pressing forward. Okay, next, for kicks, I'm going to go ahead and install the wingtips. Now, part of this is because we're waiting for the cockpit bits to come out from Quinta, and who knows how long that'll take. But honestly, the fit of the wings to the fuselage is so good that I could probably go ahead and get some parts of the wings actually completed if we have to wait. And I was going to leave these off, but especially with the insignia on the lower side, there's the need to get in there and actually glue these together, because placing the insignias without these things glued would be a bit dicey, to say the least. I have to put a little bit of filler right in there, but it's also right along the pylon, so maybe not. Alright, there is one wingtip installed. Okay, there we have 2 folded wingtips. Fantastic. Okay, back to the auxiliary air doors. These things are pretty much ready to go. But before I do more with them, they need a flat coat. So, hello MRP. There we have it. Okay, so next up, I'm going to move on from painting things for a moment and get back to some construction with the inner pylons. Now we're going to be revisiting these a lot over the next several videos, because they're going to get painted, they're going to have to get situated for holding triple ejector racks, and all that kind of fun stuff. But for right now, we're just gluing them together, and they glue together quite well. Now, the curious thing here is, to me, it gives you different part numbers. So there's like N10, N11, N12, and N13. And you might be worried for a moment that these things are handed or something, but that doesn't seem to be the case. Okay, so now that the pylons are built, it's time to put on their feet, or I guess their hats, whatever. And basically, these just plug in like so. Easy as you can. Just like that. Now we've got to put in the sway braces. These are also pretty simple. Hardest part is honestly holding them, but each one of them has these little notches right here in the back, and those line up to some spots on the pylons themselves. So right there. Come on, you. There we go. Backside here, got something similar. So once they're in place, just a little bit of extra thin. And we've got a pylon. Now there does need to be a little tiny bit of cleanup along the bottom here, probably along this top seam, just very, very light sanding if anything. But that gets us to our pylons. Now, I generally think that the kit Sidewinder rails are okay. They're perfectly sufficient, I think, if you're planning to mount Sidewinders, which I'm not. I took the liberty of snagging some of Flying Leathernecks' awesome 3D printed replacement launch rails. And these are designed for the Tamiya kit. And I mean, the detail on these things, if it'll focus for me, the detail on these things is just phenomenal. I mean, look in there, inside the rail and all that. And they're set up to fit the Tamiya kit. And basically all you do is plug them in. Now granted, I am going to have to do a little bit of, I think maybe some widening of the mounting holes. Maybe a little bit of cleanup along the base of the rails themselves. Because they're not quite flush. You know, you can see that little standing proud bit there. But compared to 99% of various resiny type accessories, I mean, the drop fitness of these is pretty cool. And again, because I'm not planning on running sidewinders, I will have the ability to show off a lot of that really lovely launcher detail. And that's going to be a lot of fun, and I think it will add a little bit of pop to the underside. And then these things just go onto the underside, like so. I mean, it doesn't get much better than that. Alright, so before I pay too much attention to getting the Sidewinder racks fully blended into the main inboard pylons and all that good stuff, I want to go ahead and deal with what's going to go on the bottom, which is triple ejector racks that will each be holding 2 LAU-3 rocket pods. Now, when I first pulled these out of the box, it's been a while since I've dealt with Edward 148 scale triple ejector racks, and so I was kind of like, what the fuck's going on here? How do I make these things sit happy and all that stuff? Well, just like their 132nd ones, they come with these little bits, you can see right there, that essentially sit on top of this little rail thing. Pretty much just like that. Cool, huh? Now, it just so happens these are also very nice fit for these little mounting holes in. Anyway, it just so happens these are really solid fits for these little squares in the bottom of the Tamiya pylons. And so we don't really have to even worry about spacing or any of that stuff because they just fit in there, and so it's a matter of later in the build just gluing them in place. And then the triple ejector rack. Oh, this is the challenge. I think I just said. So my goal is to get these little things glued to this thing, but in the proper like that, so that then they sit all nice and happy, blah blah blah. So what I'm going to try to do, and probably fuck up, is take some ammo black CA and just squeeze it. No, kidding. I'm not going to do that. That would be a bad idea. Put a little bit of CA on the top of this ink cup. Set it over here. Now the trick is going to be getting it onto these things without them pulling out of their channels as I do so. And then if I had 3 hands, I would spray some accelerator. I do not have 3 hands. But there we have it. Triple ejector rack with the fun shit installed. So while I've been working on these LAU-3s, as much as I really like the engineering and the way that the caps literally pop on and off, and you don't have to deal with any sort of weird steps or anything like that because they're literally plugs into a hollow space. You know, that's cool and all, but LAU-3s don't have raised front and end caps. They are all the same diameter, and I just can't unsee this. And so, as much as I like the detail and the engineering on these things, can't have it. I just can't. So instead, I pulled out some Eduard LAU-3s, which are a bit clunkier in terms of design, but they look the part. They have the right diameter. It doesn't change across the length of the tube to the caps. Back might be a little tiny bit smaller, but it's, you know, not a big deal. And so I have gone ahead and drilled holes in these and very lightly mounted them to the triple ejector racks with some metal wire. Nice and solid. Now the problem, at least with this particular one, is I cannot get it to sit just by itself on the pylon. Like, if I glued it in, it'd be great, but there's work I need to do before I'm ready to glue these in, obviously. But here is how this one will look when all is said and done. And so, you know, it sits straighter like that, but pretty damn cool sitting there with the rocket pod hanging off. And then these outer ones will be multiple ejector racks with some Mark 83s on them. Okay, so I've been a little bit busy off camera just kind of getting some of the Ordnance stuff together. You may see this big-ass centerline tank sitting here. Went together very well. The only reason that it has the black CA line across it that's been sanded back is basically just a fight against any potential for ghost seams, because on such a big, long run like that, it's possible. And, you know, I just want to make sure that it's as smooth as possible as I can get it going into priming and painting. As far as the rest of the Ordnance loadout, the inboard pylons, we've already covered the flying Leathernecks Sidewinder rails, which are amazing. They're perfect because these VMFA 323 birds, when they were flying this tactical air support role, didn't carry missiles, or didn't carry air-to-air missiles, I should say. And so these need to be empty, and this way it's possible to show what they look like on the side and have all that nice detail in there, as opposed to the Tamiya ones, which are just kind of flat. So, yay! Other than that, we've covered off on the triple ejector racks with their mounted LAU-10 rocket cans. Now, I'm not posing these in situ just because they will fall off immediately, but basically these little horns plug in these little holes, everything is perfect. They'll be very easy to glue in when the time comes. On the outboard racks, I've got two Eduard multiple ejector racks. They are my, trying to think of the right term here, my least disliked aftermarket multiple ejector racks. I still dislike them. They are the wrong size. The length is off. They're a bit of a pain in the ass to get together, particularly because of all these little sway braces that are tiny, and it's still required to clean up on one end because of resin casting. But they are together now, so at least they've got that going for them, right? And they've got the same sort of upper horn attachment plug into the pylon setup as the triple ejector racks do. Now with these, I don't actually have what's going on them yet, but it will be two Mark 83s per side, and they will be going on the lower pylon and then the outer pylon up front. Everything else will be empty on those things. Probably because a Mark 83, I imagine, out here in the back would be too close to bumping up against control surfaces and just causing all kinds of havoc. So they'll be up front. So yeah, that is where the F4 stands, and I think this place... So yeah, that is where the F4 stands at the moment, and I think this marks a pretty good place to drop out of episode 1, just because it's already running pretty long. I've already done quite a number of things, from the gearbays to the engines, to sorting out the Ordnance, to getting the, you know, the wing folds installed. All that kind of stuff is, you know, quite a bit of progress, even though this thing is still very much in pieces. So I'm going to go ahead and drop here and pick back up with episode 2, where we will be moving into things like priming the Ordnance and painting and probably even decaling, and just seeing if I can get it out of the way up front. Maybe moving into the landing gear, maybe moving into getting the intakes all sorted out and ready. or the exhaust cans themselves. We'll see. But that's what's coming up. And real quick, before I drop off, I want to go ahead and give a quick shout out again to Lionheart Hobby for tossing this kit my way to do with what I will. They've been on a definite tear lately. They just launched their online store at lionhearthobby.com, and it is a pretty cool site, and they do offer all kinds of great shipping options and things like that. So if you want another place to get things online and you want it with a friendly, knowledgeable staff behind it, definitely check them out. So that is that for this Phantom installment. So that is that for this kickoff installment of the F-4B Phantom build. Be sure to stick around for episode 2 coming shortly, and I'll catch you later.